Vulcana was one of the very first professional strong women, a true pioneer of female weightlifting. I was expecting this video to be no more than a couple minutes long, but the more I looked into Vulcana, the more I got sucked into thrilling tales of not just impressive strength, but also heroism, murder, and even coming back from the dead. So, dear friends, sit back and enjoy this story of the great Vulcana. Kate Williams, better known by her stage name Vulcana, was considered to be among the strongest women in the world in her prime. Sadly, nowadays very few people have heard of her, and in fact, similar to my coverage of Ivy Russell, this is going to be the first video on YouTube to go in depth on Vulcana. As always, let's take it back to the beginning. Kate was born in 1874 in a Welsh town called Abergavenny. As a young child, she showed great interest in physical culture, and she was clearly very strong for her age. She would swing on trees and often show off her strength by shifting pianos and lifting other heavy objects. At the age of 15, she met a strongman by the name of William Roberts, also known by his stage name Atlas. The two immediately became very close, and Kate even joined his act. When Atlas's group was set to perform in London, Kate ran away from home to join them. In London, Atlas's group, called the Society of Athletes, performed in music halls. Similar to vaudeville shows in America, the music halls in Victorian England would offer all sorts of entertainment, including comedy, music, dance, and a wide range of weird and wonderful specialty acts. The larger venues could host thousands of spectators who would all be eating, drinking, and smoking while the entertainment took place. The move from a small town in Wales to a massive city like London would have been quite the shock for the young girl. But she was brave and determined to make the most of her opportunity. Luckily for us, Atlas was an avid photographer, so we have many pictures of Kate and the rest of the group from here on out. Kate would take on the stage name Vulcana, which I'm assuming is a reference to Vulcan, the Roman god of fire. She very quickly became the star of the show, which would even be renamed to the Atlas and Vulcana group of society athletes. Atlas clearly recognized how marketable Vulcana's strength and beauty was. We can see all the promotional material for their shows only had photos of Vulcana, and never of Atlas or anyone else. Interestingly, Atlas and Vulcana were always advertised as being brother and sister, even though they weren't related. It's not exactly clear why they chose to do this, but there is more to the story between the two, which I'll cover a little bit later. Vulcana made great use of her talents and would entertain the crowds by lifting heavy weights. Sadly, we don't have any photos of her performing, but we do have this one photo of her holding a large barbell. Clearly, she had massive thighs and must have had a very powerful lower body. We can see this barbell is designed specifically for a bent press, with the indented grip in the center. We don't know how much the barbell weighed, but Vulcana would have been among the only women in the world capable of lifting it. Here's a flyer where she's offering 50 pounds, which would have been quite a lot of money back then, to any woman, amateur or professional, of any weight or nationality who can lift her barbell. As far as I'm aware, no other woman was able to complete the challenge. Another famous strong woman named Athilda apparently attempted to lift it for a full 25 minutes before being forced to give up. So while there weren't really any strength competitions for women back then, this stunt does at least give some credit to her being one of the strongest women. Here's another very cool stunt. We can see her performing a bent press, but instead of a barbell, she's just using some dude. The caption here says that the guy weighs 12 stone, which is 168 pounds or 76 kilos. So apparently she was strong enough to hold a fully grown man above her head with one arm, which again goes to show how incredibly strong she must have been. The Atlas and Vulcana group of society athletes performed at every music hall of note in Britain and Ireland during the 1890s. This brought a lot of attention to Vulcana, and she would even be featured in muscle magazines, as we can see here with this impressive bicep pose showing she also had a well-developed upper body. Eugene Sandow, the most famous bodybuilder of the time, had a full 4-page article about Vulcana in his magazine. Like I mentioned earlier, we can see here Atlas is described as being her brother. The article goes on to describe Vulcana's impressive strength and muscular development, then says, quote, "When you hear or read this description, you naturally conjure up visions of a large, heavy, mannish-looking person devoid of the soft feminine graces of true womanhood. But you only have to see Vulcana to realize there is nothing masculine about her in spite of her strength." At the end of the article, Vulcana makes an appeal to mothers, telling them to encourage their daughters to get plenty of exercise and to avoid corsets or other tight clothes which can restrict the children's mobility. As we hinted at earlier, there was more to the story between Atlas and Vulcana. You see, at some point the two would fall deeply in love and become absolutely inseparable for the rest of their lives. We know that Atlas actually still had a wife and kids back home in Wales, and divorce was almost impossible in those times. So now it makes a bit more sense why Atlas and Vulcana chose to present themselves as brother and sister. It was likely to avoid gossip. From what I've read, Atlas remained on good terms with his family in Wales and continued to support them financially. But his true life partner would end up being Vulcana, and the two actually had 6 children together. Vulcana having 6 children while also continuing to work and perform makes her even more impressive. From what I could gather, basically all the children would end up working with their parents once they got older. Now let's cover some of Vulcana's feats of heroism. I didn't call her a Victorian Wonder Woman for nothing. In the summer of 1901, she dove into a river to save 2 children from drowning. Later that year, she freed a stuck wagon by lifting one end of it, allowing the conductor to free the wheel that was causing the problem. This left onlookers and a policeman who was on the scene totally shocked. The next event happened in 1910, and it's one some of you might have heard of if you're a fan of crime stories. This guy called Dr. Hawley Crippen murdered his wife, Cora Crippen, who also happened to be a music hall performer and a good friend of Vulcana's. The case is quite complicated, but basically this Dr. Crippen would end up being apprehended on a ship as he tried to escape across the Atlantic to Canada. His arrest has historical significance because it was the first capture of a criminal which was aided by wireless telegraph technology. But anyway, Vulcana was very suspicious of her friend's sudden disappearance, so she was actually the first to alert police and kick off the investigation. In 1921, one of the theaters where Vulcana worked caught fire. She heroically ran into the flames, risking her life to save another act's horses. This caused serious burns to her head as the fire burned off most of her long hair. A very badass and courageous feat indeed, all to save animals which weren't even hers. Shortly after the fire, an article was written about her where she describes a couple more interesting events. I'll read those for you now. These are Vulcana's own words describing how she handled a troublesome man who wouldn't stop bothering her on a ladies-only train car in Australia. Quote, "This fellow came in and started to make himself obnoxious. I pointed out to him that it was ladies only, and with considerable insolence he asked me if I was an American, and if I had bought the train. I told him I had not, but I had paid for a seat in the compartment, and that if he was a gentleman he would go out. He said he would do nothing of the kind. He added that I could call the guard or anybody else I liked, but not one of them could put him out. Thereupon he started to smoke. I told him I did not need the guard to put him out, as I would do so myself. He laughed, not without some excuse, for he was a brawny sort of chap. And I know I am not much to look at in ordinary street clothes. But he was not long in being disillusioned. Catching him by the neck of the coat and the back of the pants, I landed him right out before he knew where he was." The train was slowly on the move by this time, and the guard, seeing the figure jumping out through the door, thought it was an attempt at suicide. The train was stopped and a search was made for the man, but he had skulked away out of sight before the officials got back to the place he had made his exit. A very cool story indeed, and it's made much more believable having seen her bench press a man. Here are two more stories from the same article about how she dealt with pickpockets. Quote, "Once I was robbed of my purse in London. I was looking in a shop window when I saw in the glass the reflection of the movements of a man behind me, and these aroused my suspicions. Turning around, I caught the man with my purse in his hand. Snatching him by the hand, I gave him a twist that he won't forget in a hurry, and as I took the purse out of his hand, I remarked that I thought he had made a mistake. He quite probably thought so too, but he didn't wait to explain. I had a somewhat similar experience in Birmingham. A man slipping my watch out of my waist whilst I was looking in a jeweler's window. I felt the movement and turning around said thank you, giving him at the same time one in the jaw straight from the shoulder. He went down like a 9-pin. A policeman came up to find out the reason for the hubbub. And when he learned that the man on the pavement had my watch in his hand, he promptly arrested him. So yeah, Vulcana was definitely a beast, and not to be messed with. I would like to rewind a bit and briefly cover some of Vulcana's travels. Her success had her performing all over the world. As we just heard, she even made it to Australia. We have many photos of her in France. We also have this very cool photo showing some of the men of the group lifting weights and posing in a gym in Paris. Sadly, we don't get to see the women training, but we do see them in the background of one of the photos. Here we can see several photos of them in the Netherlands next to some windmills. In these photos, they are in Southeast Asia, likely a stopover on their way to Australia. Here are photos in Northern Africa. Again, we need to remember Vulcana's humble beginnings in a small Welsh town. Traveling back then was much more difficult and expensive than it is now. So what a great privilege it must have been to explore the world like this, performing for so many different people. In 1903, they made their way to Australia. The voyage would have taken around 6 weeks by sea. Vulcana found great success in the country, and they performed in every major city and many towns during their time there. She was even asked to sit for a famous sculptor named Nelson Illingworth, who created beautiful bronze sculptures of Vulcana. Clearly, Vulcana and Atlas had a very long and exciting career. Vulcana continued to perform into her 50s until she finally retired in 1932, once the popularity of music halls was beginning to decline. Here are some photos of her as an older woman, and we can see she is still looking beautiful and strong. You would hope the story would end there and the family retires happily ever after. But there's a twist. In 1939, now 64 years old, Vulcana was hit by a car in London. She was lying on the road and, incredibly, she was conscious while she heard someone pronounce her dead. She was taken to the morgue, and as she was laid out on a slab getting prepared for burial, an attendant at the morgue noticed a tear running down the side of her face. They immediately knew this would not happen if someone was truly dead, so they rushed her to the hospital. While Vulcana did survive, she sadly suffered some brain damage due to lack of oxygen. The strong and vibrant woman that took the world by storm would never be the same again. Vulcana would live through World War II and die in 1946 at age 72. Atlas was caring for her until the very end, but he also died the same year at age 83. And that, my friends, is the end of the story. I think Vulcana is a fantastic role model and inspiration for any woman interested in getting stronger or lifting weights. You might be asking yourself where I managed to find all these photos and stories. Well, I was fortunate enough to stumble on a website which was created by one of Vulcana's great-granddaughters, a woman by the name of Jane Hunt. The website vulcanaonline.com is sadly now abandoned and no longer up, but I managed to access it with the Internet Archive Wayback Machine. I'll link it in the description if you guys want to check it out. There's so much more there which I couldn't cover in this video. If you enjoyed this, make sure to check out my videos on Abby Stockton and Ivy Russell, two old school lady lifters who I have also covered. As I'm sure you can imagine, these videos take a very long time to put together. So if you made it this far, please consider showing your support by dropping a like and a comment. Thank you for watching.